He stepped forward when the whole town looked away. The town of Willow Creek looked peaceful at first glance. Its narrow streets were lined with old wooden houses painted in soft shades of white and blue. The flowers grew along the windowsills, and the sound of children playing echoed lightly from the small park in the center of town. On a bright morning, it was the kind of place where people nodded to each other as they passed by, and everyone seemed to know everyone else. But beneath the calm surface there were secrets that most townspeople preferred not to see. Eli Thompson walked along the main street, his hands in his pockets and his eyes scanning the familiar sights. He had lived in Willow Creek all his life, and yet, despite knowing everyone in town, he often felt invisible. People smiled politely at him, waved from a distance, and sometimes stopped to exchange a few words, but they never truly noticed him. He was quiet, not because he lacked opinions, but because he had learned that saying too much often caused trouble. The world seemed safer when he stayed in the background. Eli's small apartment overlooked the park, and from his window he could see the daily routines of his neighbors. The baker, Mr. Barris, arrived every morning before sunrise, opening the bakery with the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Mrs. Blang, the elderly woman who lived across the street, tended her rose garden with care, humming old songs under her breath. Children ran across the grass, chasing each other and laughing loudly. To anyone else, it was a perfect, quiet life. But Eli noticed the things others ignored. A group of older boys often lingered near the edges of the park. They had a reputation for teasing the younger children, and sometimes stealing small items from the market stalls. Most townspeople saw it as harmless mischief. They told themselves the boys would grow out of it, and it was better not to get involved. But Eli watched quietly, noticing the fear in the eyes of the youngest children. Even the parents, busy with their daily routines, looked the other way. It was a small injustice, but to Eli, it felt like a symptom of something larger, a town afraid to face its own problems. One particular morning, as the sun rose over the rooftops, Eli saw a small incident that shook him more than he expected. A young boy, no older than 7, had tripped near the fountain and fallen. He began to cry softly, rubbing his scraped knee, laughing and pointing. No one came to help. The adults in the area looked past the scene as if it wasn't happening at all. Some quickened their steps, others pretended not to see. Eli felt a knot tighten in his chest. He wanted to step forward to help the boy, but hesitation held him back. He had always believed in doing the right thing, but doing so in public could make him the target of ridicule or worse. As he watched, Eli's mind wandered back to his own childhood. He remembered similar moments when he had been scared or hurt and had wished someone would help him. There had been times when the town's indifference had left a mark on him, times when he felt small and alone. He did not want that for this boy. But still, he hesitated.
Fear was a powerful thing, stronger than most people admitted. It was the fear of standing out, the fear of judgment, and the fear of challenging the way things had always been.
Eli walked closer to the fountain, moving slowly so as not to draw attention.
He reached out a hand to the boy, who looked up with wide, grateful eyes.
Are you okay? Eli asked gently. The boy nodded, still sniffling. Eli helped him to his feet and brushed the dirt off his clothes. The older boys shuffled away, muttering complaints under their breath. Eli turned to them, his voice steady but firm.
You should leave him alone.
It's not right to scare others. For a moment the boys looked at him in surprise. No one had spoken to them like that before. Then, one by one, they walked away, muttering, but the fear in their eyes was unmistakable.
The boy's mother appeared shortly after, rushing toward them with worry etched on her face.
She thanked Eli with a gentle smile and led her son away. Eli watched them leave, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. It was a small act, almost invisible to the world, but to him, it mattered. It reminded him that courage could be quiet, that standing up for someone, even in a small way, was important. That evening, Eli returned to his apartment, feeling both exhausted and awake. He sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and pink. The town continued its routine, unaware of the small drama that had just unfolded. People moved through their lives, busy with chores, errands, and conversations. Break. Yet for Eli, the world felt slightly different. He realized that seeing the truth and acting on it could be uncomfortable, even frightening, but it was necessary. He thought about the boy in the park and the older boys who had learned, perhaps for the first time, that someone cared enough to intervene. In the following days, Eli noticed more signs of problems around Willow Creek. He saw the small ways in which people ignored unfairness, workers treated badly by their employers, children bullied in school, and neighbors arguing over petty disagreements while serious issues went unresolved. Each time the town looked away, and each time Eli felt a quiet urgency growing inside him.
He could no longer ignore what he saw.
It was as if the world had been painted in layers, and only those willing to look beneath the surface could see the cracks. Even as he walked the familiar streets, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He realized that the town had grown comfortable with inaction, that people preferred silence to confrontation, and that fear had become a barrier stronger than any physical wall. Yet Eli also knew that courage, no matter how small, could inspire change. One small act could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. He remembered the boy in the park and the look of relief on his face, and a determination began to grow within him. If he stepped forward when others looked away, perhaps he could make a difference. Not just for one child, but for the entire town. That night, as the stars appeared above Willow Creek, Eli made a silent promise to himself. He would no longer be invisible. He would no longer let fear or hesitation dictate his actions. The town might not notice him at first, but he would stand for what was right, even if he had to do it alone. The quiet streets, the smiling neighbors, and the beautiful flowers would not distract him from the truth he had come to see. Courage was not loud or public. It was quiet, steady, and unwavering. And so, in the peaceful town of Willow Creek, where everyone seemed content to look the other way, one man began to awaken. He did not know what challenges lay ahead, nor the obstacles he would face. But he knew in his heart that stepping forward, even when the whole town looked away, was the first step toward change. The days following the incident at the park passed quietly on the surface, but for Ellie Thompson, nothing felt the same. He walked the streets of Willow Creek with sharper eyes now, noticing the small injustices that everyone else seemed happy to ignore. It was as if a layer of calm had been lifted from the town, revealing the cracks and weaknesses that had always been there. The older boys in the park stayed away from that corner for a few days, but Eli knew that fear alone could not change hearts' breaths. Real courage required persistence, and that was what he had begun to feel growing inside him. One morning, Eli passed by the town square where the weekly market was held. Stalls lined the cobblestone streets, each covered in brightly colored cloths that fluttered in the gentle wind. Farmers shouted about their fresh vegetables, bakers displayed golden loaves of bread, and children ran between the stalls, laughing and playing. On the surface it was cheerful, but Eli noticed a man struggling to carry a basket of produce. Several townspeople passed by without offering help. Some smiled politely and moved on, while others whispered and looked away, pretending not to see.
Eli stepped forward. "I will. You are in the middle of my road."
He helped the man lift the basket and asked if he could carry it to the nearby shop. The man's eyes filled with gratitude, and he murmured a quiet thank you. Eli felt a small warmth in his chest. Each act of kindness, however minor, felt like a tiny spark in a world that often preferred darkness. But he also knew that these sparks could easily be extinguished if no one else dared to help.
Later that week, a larger incident occurred that would shake Eli even more.
Fire broke out in one of the town's older buildings, near the back of the market street. Thick smoke curled into the sky, and flames licked the wooden walls. People gathered in the street, shouting and pointing. But most kept their distance. No one wanted to risk stepping forward. Some whispered about calling for help, while others seemed paralyzed by fear. The fire was small at first, but it spread quickly, fueled by old dry wood. Eli's heart pounded as he watched the chaos. Without thinking twice, he ran toward the building. He knew it was dangerous, but the thought of leaving someone trapped inside was unbearable. Inside, he found a young boy crying, scared and alone, surrounded by thick smoke. The boy's parents were nowhere to be seen, and the older people nearby were hesitant, shouting suggestions but doing nothing themselves. Eli grabbed the boy, holding him close to protect him from the smoke, and ran out of the building just as a part of the roof collapsed behind them. The crowd gasped, but no one stepped closer to help. Once the boy was safe, Eli felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that the child was unharmed, but frustration at the town's hesitation. Why did people turn away from problems that could have been stopped? Why did fear seem stronger than compassion? He realized that the town's passivity had become a habit, a way to avoid responsibility. And yet, Eli also knew that standing by quietly, as he had for so long, was no longer an option.
After the fire, Eli began to talk quietly to some of the townspeople he trusted. He spoke to Mrs. Sappler,
Lang, the elderly woman with the rose garden, and to Mr. Harris, the baker.
Both nodded thoughtfully as he shared his concerns.
It feels like we ignore things we shouldn't, Eli said one afternoon, looking out the window of the bakery at the bustling street below.
People are scared, yes, but if we don't act, who will? Mrs. Lang nodded slowly. You are right, Eli. Many of us have turned away because it's easier, but that doesn't make it right. You have courage. Maybe it's time the town learns from you. Her words gave Eli a quiet strength. He realized that sometimes leading meant being the first to step forward, even if others were hesitant. Courage could inspire others, but it had to begin with someone willing to act. As the days passed, Eli noticed more signs that the town's indifference was causing harm. Children were bullied in school. Workers were treated unfairly, and neighbors argued over minor disputes while ignoring real problems. He saw families struggling quietly, their needs overlooked because everyone was too busy with their own lives. It was easy to see why fear had become the norm. But people worried about gossip, social rejection, or upsetting the balance of the town. But Eli also knew that fear could never be an excuse for doing nothing. One evening, while walking home from the market, Eli heard raised voices coming from a nearby alley. Curious, he approached quietly and saw two men arguing over a young girl's lost wallet. The men were angry, and the girl looked frightened. Most people passed without stopping, but Eli could not ignore the scene. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "What is going on here?" he asked.
The men turned, startled to see someone confront them. Eli continued, "Leave her alone. That wallet is hers, and you have no right to scare her." The men hesitated, their anger faltering in the face of Eli's steady presence. Slowly, they backed away, and the girl ran to her parents who had finally noticed the commotion. She looked back at Eli and smiled shyly, a small gesture that filled him with quiet satisfaction. Each time he intervened, Eli felt both the weight and the reward of responsibility. He realized that courage was not about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear.
Eli also began to reflect on the town itself.
Willow Creek had a long history, filled with people who had once fought for justice and fairness.
Over time, however, comfort and habit had made them forget those values. The townspeople had stopped noticing small acts of wrongdoing, and fear had taken the place of courage.
But Eli believed that change was still possible. He believed that one person, acting with honesty and bravery, could inspire others to do the same.
He decided to take small steps to encourage awareness and action. He spoke to children at the park about kindness, fairness, and looking out for one another. He helped neighbors with chores, encouraged adults to notice the small injustices around them, and quietly challenged those who acted unfairly. Each act, no matter how small, seemed to ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could not always see.
Despite his efforts, Eli faced resistance. Some people whispered about him behind his back.
Some called him nosy or meddlesome. Others avoided him entirely, afraid to be associated with someone who challenged the town's way of ignoring problems. These experiences were difficult, but Eli reminded himself why he had begun. Courage was not measured by popularity. It was measured by action, and action required persistence. As the sun set over Willow Creek, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Eli walked through the quiet streets. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also the spark of hope. The town was not yet ready to fully embrace change, but he knew that by stepping forward he had begun something important. He had shown that courage was possible, that fear could be challenged, and that small acts of kindness and bravery could create ripples that might one day reach every corner of the town. That night Eli sat by his window looking at the stars above Willow Creek. The town slept peacefully, unaware of the quiet work happening in their midst. But Eli knew that change began with noticing, acting, and refusing to look away. He thought of the boy at the market, the child in the fire, and the young girl in the alley. Each of them reminded him why courage mattered. Each of them reminded him that standing up for what was right, even when no one else would, was worth every risk. In those quiet hours, Eli made a silent promise. He would continue to step forward. He would continue to act, to challenge injustice, and to inspire others to do the same. Willow Creek might not notice him yet, but one day they would understand.
One day, the town would learn that courage, even in a single person, could awaken the hearts of many. And so, Eli Thompson continued his quiet journey, moving through the streets of Willow Creek with steady determination.
He did not know what obstacles lay ahead, nor the resistance he would face. But he knew one thing for certain. When others looked away, he would not. He would step forward, and in that choice he found the first flicker of change, a small but growing light in a town that had forgotten how to see. Eli Thompson had begun to understand one simple truth. Courage was rarely easy, and it often required taking the first step where everyone else hesitated. The quiet acts he had done, helping the boy in the park, saving the child from the fire, protecting the girl in the alley, were only the beginning. The town of Willow Creek remained mostly unchanged on the surface. People smiled and nodded, but fear and habit still kept them from acting. Eli knew that if he truly wanted change, he had to take a bolder step, one that would make the town confront its own shortcomings.
It all began one morning when Eli walked past the town hall. A small crowd had gathered outside, murmuring anxiously.
Word spread quickly that the mayor's office had ignored reports of a family struggling to pay rent. Their home was falling apart, leaking in the rain, and the children often went hungry. The townspeople had sent letters and petitions, but nothing had been done. Fear of speaking up or upsetting the balance of the town kept most people away from the issue. They whispered behind closed doors but took no real action. Eli felt a familiar knot tighten in his chest. Breath. He did not hesitate. Eli pushed through the small crowd and entered the town hall. Operation. Inside, the room smelled of polished wood and faint dust. The mayor, a stern man with graying hair, looked up from his desk, surprised to see someone standing before him. "Can I help you?" the mayor asked, his voice polite but distant. Eli took a deep breath. "I am here about the Harris family," he said calmly. "Their home is falling apart, and their children are hungry. They have asked for help, and no one has answered. I cannot let that continue." The mayor frowned and shifted in his chair. "Thompson, we are aware of the situation. There are many families in need, and resources are limited. We cannot help everyone immediately." Eli's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. "Then we must start somewhere. Waiting will only make things worse. The family is suffering now. They cannot wait for bureaucracy or fear." The mayor's assistant whispered something, and the mayor shook his head. "You are brave, but you must understand the consequences. Stepping forward publicly may make others uncomfortable. People do not like to be confronted with problems. They prefer to ignore." Eli looked around the room at the quiet officials and staff. He realized that this was exactly why the town had allowed injustices to grow unchecked. People avoided responsibility because it was easier than action. And now, he had a choice: leave quietly, like everyone else, or push forward and face the resistance. Eli chose to push forward. He asked for a meeting with the family immediately and promised to help coordinate repairs and supplies. Word spread quickly throughout the town, and reactions were mixed. Some whispered behind his back, calling him meddlesome or naive. Others watched curiously, wondering if his courage would make a difference. Eli did not allow the opinions of others to sway him. He knew that standing for what was right often meant standing alone at first. Over the next few days, Eli visited the Harris family multiple times. He helped fix leaking roofs, patched broken windows, and brought warm meals for the children. But each small act mattered, and the family's gratitude was evident in their smiles and quiet words of thanks. But Eli noticed that some neighbors avoided him entirely. They looked away when he passed, as if his courage made them uncomfortable. He realized that fear was contagious, and indifference was deeply rooted. Changing the town's habits would not be simple, but he believed it could be done. One afternoon, as Eli worked with the family to repair a broken door, a crowd began to gather outside. At first, it was a small group of curious onlookers, watching from a distance. Then more people came, some whispering, others shaking their heads in disapproval. They were unsure of Eli's motives, uncertain if helping the Harris family was really necessary. Eli felt a pang of doubt, wondering if he was making a difference at all. But when the youngest child ran up to him, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, he felt a quiet reassurance. Even one life touched was enough to justify the effort. The situation soon drew attention from the local newspaper. A reporter arrived asking questions about the Harris family and the assistance Eli was providing. The article painted a picture of a town hesitant to act, and one man willing to step forward. When it was published, reactions were immediate. Some praised Eli's bravery, leaving notes of encouragement and small donations. Others criticized him, claiming he was seeking attention or interfering where he was not needed. Eli did not respond to the criticism. He had learned that courage often invited judgment, but actions spoke louder than words. With renewed determination, Eli began organizing more efforts to help those in need.
He started visiting schools, speaking with teachers about bullying and fairness, and encouraging children to look out for each other.
He coordinated neighbors to repair homes and clean public spaces. Slowly, the town began to notice. Small acts of kindness and assistance spread like ripples in water. People who had previously turned away began to participate, inspired by Eli's quiet leadership. Even those who had been skeptical started to reconsider their inaction. Despite the progress, Eli faced new challenges. Some people resented the attention he was drawing. They whispered about how he disrupted the usual order of the town, how he made others feel guilty for their inaction. Eli also faced physical exhaustion, working long hours to repair homes, deliver meals, and assist those in need.
Yet, each obstacle strengthened his resolve.
He knew that meaningful change was never easy. Courage required perseverance, and Eli was prepared to continue, even when it was difficult. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli stood on the small hill overlooking Willow Creek. The town stretched out before him, its streets quiet, the windows of homes glowing softly with light. He thought about the steps he had taken, the Harris family, the children in the park, the small acts of kindness that had begun to inspire others. He knew the town had a long way to go, but he also understood that the first step had been taken. Courage had begun to spread, quietly and steadily, and the town could no longer ignore it. As night fell, Eli returned to his apartment tired but satisfied. He reflected on the reactions of the townspeople, the mix of admiration, skepticism, and fear. He realized that standing up for what was right would always involve discomfort, but discomfort was preferable to inaction. He also understood that his efforts were not just about helping others. They were about showing the town that courage and responsibility were choices everyone could make. In the following weeks, Eli continued his work, growing more confident in his role as an unexpected leader. The town began to change, slowly and unevenly. Some neighbors joined him in small acts of service, inspired by his determination. Teachers spoke to their students about fairness and standing up for others. The small ripples Eli had started were turning into waves, slowly challenging the habits of fear and indifference that had long held the town in place. Eli knew there would be setbacks, but not everyone would support him, and some would actively resist change. But he also knew that stepping forward when others looked away was not about recognition or praise. It was about doing what was right, even when it was difficult. The courage he had found within himself was no longer quiet. It had begun to awaken the town, and in that awakening Eli saw the possibility of a better future for Willow Creek. One quiet morning, as he walked past the town square, Eli noticed something different. People who had previously looked away were now offering small gestures of help, holding doors open, assisting with heavy baskets, checking in on neighbors. It was not much, but it was progress. The town was learning, slowly and imperfectly, that action mattered more than fear, that kindness mattered more than comfort, and that courage could inspire change. Eli smiled quietly to himself. He knew the journey was far from over, but he also knew that the first steps had been taken. Willow Creek had begun to awaken, and he had played a role in that transformation. As he continued walking through the streets, his heart felt lighter. Each small act, each moment of bravery, each time he stepped forward while others looked away was a victory, not just for the town but for the spirit of courage itself. And so, Eli Thompson continued his quiet but determined work. He faced challenges, criticism, and doubt, but he never wavered. He understood that standing up for what was right required persistence and patience. The town had begun to change, slowly and unevenly, but it had begun. And Eli knew that by continuing to act, by continuing to step forward when others looked away, he could help Willow Creek become a place where courage, kindness, and fairness were no longer rare, but the way of life. Eli Thompson had been quietly changing Willow Creek, but not everyone welcomed his courage. While some townspeople had begun to act, inspired by his small victories, others were uncomfortable. They did not like being reminded of their own inaction, and Eli's presence forced them to face truths they had long avoided. For the first time, he felt the weight of resistance, not from disasters or accidents, but from the very people he was trying to help. It began with whispers. At the market, Eli overheard people talking as he walked by. Breath. "Why is he always interfering?" one woman muttered. "He thinks he can change everything." Others nodded quietly, some avoiding his gaze altogether. The children he had once encouraged to stand up for themselves no longer ran freely when he appeared. They sensed the tension. Eli felt a pang of sadness, but also understood that resistance was natural. Courage often made others uncomfortable before it inspired them. Then came the first confrontation.
One evening, as Eli helped repair a broken fence at a neighbor's home, a group of townspeople approached him. Among them was Mr. Panzet.
Carter, a man well respected in the town but stubborn in his ways.
"Eli," he said firmly, "you have gone too far. You are stirring up trouble where there is none. People are frightened of what you are doing."
Birth.
Why can't you let things be? Eli wiped the sweat from his brow and looked Mr. Carter in the eye.
Breath. "I am not causing trouble," he replied calmly. "I am helping people who cannot help themselves. That is the right thing to do." Mr. Carter's expression darkened.
The town has its own way of handling things. You cannot just come in and expect everyone to follow your rules.
Eli felt a flicker of frustration but remained steady.
"I am not asking anyone to follow me," he said.
"I am asking people to notice, to act when it is needed, and to do what is right. That is all." The conversation ended there, but Eli knew it would not be the last challenge he faced. Over the next few days, the tension grew. Some townspeople refused to speak to him. Others complained openly to the mayor, claiming Eli was disrupting the town's peace. Even friends who had once supported him now hesitated, unsure if their loyalty would bring trouble. For the first time, Eli felt the loneliness that came with true courage. Being right was no comfort when faced with widespread resistance. Despite the growing opposition, Eli continued his work. He focused on the Harris family and other neighbors in need. He visited schools, helping children understand the importance of fairness and standing up for each other. He encouraged neighbors to assist with small repairs, clean public spaces, and support families struggling in silence. But Eli's determination remained unwavering. He knew that change was never easy, and the resistance he faced was proof that he was making a difference. One morning, Eli received news that tested his resolve. A young boy in the park had been hurt by a group of older children. When Eli arrived, he found the boy sitting on a bench, holding his scraped arm, while the older children stood nearby, smirking. A crowd had gathered, but no one intervened. Parents and neighbors watched from a distance, afraid to step in. Eli's heart ached. He knelt beside the boy, speaking softly, helping him to calm down. Then he turned to the older children. "This is not acceptable," he said firmly. "You must take responsibility for your actions and apologize." The children were taken aback. No one had ever spoken to them with such authority before. Slowly, they muttered apologies, and Eli guided them in helping the injured boy to his feet. The crowd watched silently, some surprised, some relieved, and others irritated by the disruption. Eli understood that leading by example often drew both admiration and criticism.
Change was never slow, but it was necessary.
That evening, Eli sat alone in his apartment, reflecting on the events of the day. The town was changing, but the progress was uneven. Some were inspired, some resisted, and some simply waited, unsure of what to do. Eli realized that true leadership required patience and persistence. Courage was not about being loved or praised. It was about standing firm, even when faced with criticism, doubt, and fear. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A storm swept through Willow Creek, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. Trees fell, roofs leaked, and streets flooded. Many homes were damaged, and some families were trapped by rising water. Most townspeople stayed indoors, afraid to venture out in the storm. Eli, however, did not hesitate. He grabbed supplies, raincoats, and flashlights, and set out to help those in need. The first family he reached was the Harris family. Their roof had caved in, and water was pouring into the house. The children huddled in blankets, frightened by the storm. Eli worked quickly, moving furniture to safer areas, covering the roof with tarps and comforting the children. By the time the neighbors began to notice, Eli had already organized a small group to assist with other emergencies. Some joined reluctantly, but many hesitated, paralyzed by fear. I understood that this was part of the journey. Courage was contagious, but it often required a first spark or scale. After the storm, the town was in disarray. Streets were blocked by fallen trees, homes were damaged, and people were exhausted.
Eli continued his work helping to clear debris, distribute food, and support families.
Slowly, some townspeople began to participate. They saw Eli's determination and realized that action was possible even in the face of difficulty. Each person who stepped forward was a small victory, proof that courage could inspire others. But resistance did not disappear entirely. Some people complained that Eli was taking too much responsibility, that he was making the town dependent on him. They whispered that he was seeking attention, even though his efforts were quiet and selfless. Eli ignored the criticism, focusing on those who needed help. He understood that true courage required persistence, and that lasting change could only come from steady, unwavering action. One evening, Eli walked through the streets, now cleaned and repaired after the storm. He noticed families helping each other, children playing safely, and neighbors speaking kindly. The town was not perfect, but progress was evident.
Eli realized that change was never immediate, and resistance was part of the process.
What mattered was that he had sparked a movement, small though it might be, that encouraged people to act, even when fear and hesitation still lingered.
As the sun set, Eli reflected on the journey so far.
He had faced resistance, criticism, and loneliness, yet he had also witnessed courage, kindness, and the beginnings of transformation. He understood that standing up for what was right was never easy, but it was always necessary. Each act of bravery, no matter how small, had the potential to inspire others and create lasting change. In the quiet of his apartment, Eli made a silent promise. He would continue to step forward, even when faced with resistance. He would continue to act, to challenge fear and indifference, and to inspire courage in others. The town of Willow Creek had begun to awaken, but the journey was far from over. Eli knew that the road ahead would be difficult, yet he also understood that every challenge he faced was an opportunity to strengthen the town's spirit and encourage others to act. Eli's story was no longer just about him. It had become a story of the town itself, a story of fear, hesitation, courage, and transformation. He had begun to show the people of Willow Creek that action mattered more than fear, that kindness mattered more than comfort, and that standing up for what was right could inspire others to do the same. And so, Eli Thompson continued his work. He faced criticism, resistance, and doubt, but he never wavered. Each step forward, each act of courage brought the town closer to the values it had long forgotten: fairness, kindness, and responsibility. Willow Creek was not yet fully changed, but the seeds of courage had been planted, and Eli's unwavering determination ensured that they would continue to grow. The days following the storm in Willow Creek were quieter, but they were not empty. Eli Thompson could feel a change in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The town was waking up. People who had once avoided responsibility were beginning to notice the power of small actions. The streets were cleaner, the children played safely, and neighbors exchanged greetings with genuine smiles. Eli felt a quiet satisfaction, but he knew the journey was not over. Real change, he understood, was steady and gradual. The Harris family, whom Eli had helped repeatedly, were beginning to recover from their struggles. Their home had been repaired, and the children were happier and healthier. The parents expressed gratitude, but more than that, they had learned a lesson about courage and kindness. They began helping their neighbors, quietly carrying forward the lessons Eli had shown them. This ripple effect was exactly what Eli had hoped for. The courage to act, inspiring others to do the same. One afternoon, Ellie walked through the town square, noticing the subtle signs of transformation.
A group of teenagers were helping an elderly woman carry her groceries home.
Children who had once been too shy to speak up were now encouraging each other in small acts of fairness. Even some adults who had resisted Eli's earlier efforts were participating in minor acts of kindness. The town had not changed completely, but the seeds had been planted, and growth was visible everywhere.
Eli understood that his role was not to force change, but to lead by example.
He continued his work, helping those in need and encouraging others to act. One day, a local teacher approached him with an idea. "Eli," she said, "the children are learning from you. They are noticing courage and kindness every day. We should start a small program at school, teaching them how to help others and stand up for what is right." Eli smiled. This was exactly the kind of long-lasting change he had hoped to inspire. By teaching the next generation, he could ensure that courage and responsibility would continue to grow in Willow Creek. The word of Eli's actions began to spread beyond the town. A local newspaper ran a story about the quiet man who had stepped forward when others looked away. People in neighboring towns wrote letters expressing admiration for his courage. But Eli never sought recognition. He cared little for praise or attention. What mattered was that his actions were inspiring real change, not just temporary admiration. Each story, each act, was a reminder that courage could be quiet but powerful. Despite the progress, challenges remained. Breath. Some townspeople still resisted. They whispered that Eli was making others dependent on him or disrupting the town's routines. Yet Eli never wavered. He understood that resistance was part of the process. Rasp. Change was uncomfortable, and not everyone would embrace it immediately. But he also knew that persistence, patience, and kindness could slowly overcome fear and hesitation.
Each day he stepped forward. He was teaching the town a lesson they would not soon forget.
Inspiration. One morning, Eli was invited to speak at a community gathering in the town hall. The hall was filled with people, some curious, some skeptical, and others quietly supportive. Eli stepped to the front, feeling the weight of the moment. He spoke simply, honestly, and with conviction. "We have all lived in fear or indifference," he said. "We have turned away from problems that needed our attention. But we can choose differently. Each of us can act.
Each of us can care. Courage is not only about grand gestures.
It is about small, consistent actions. And those actions can change everything." The room was quiet at first. Then, slowly, applause began. Some people smiled, moved by his words. Others nodded in agreement, realizing the truth in what he said. Eli's voice had sparked something deeper than admiration. It had sparked understanding. People began to see that they too had the ability to act, to stand up, and to care for each other. For the first time, Willow Creek felt the weight and the potential of its own responsibility. Eli's influence continued to grow. Neighborhood projects multiplied. Families helped repair homes damaged in the past storms. Children organized small drives to collect food for those in need. Even local businesses began offering assistance to struggling families. Willow Creek, once quiet and hesitant, was becoming a town where action mattered, where fear and indifference had once held sway. Courage and kindness now grew steadily, nurtured by the example of a single man who refused to look away. Eli, however, remained humble. He did not claim ownership of the changes he inspired. He continued to act quietly, helping, teaching, and encouraging others. He knew that lasting change required more than one person. It required a community learning to care, to notice, and to act together. And slowly the people of Willow Creek were beginning to do just that. One evening, as the sun set over the rooftops, Eli walked past the park where his journey had begun. The same spot where the boy had fallen, where the first spark of action had been ignited, now looked different. Children played freely, laughter echoing through the air. Parents watched attentively, helping when needed. Even the older boys, who had once been a source of fear, now played responsibly alongside the younger children. The park, once a place of tension and neglect, had become a symbol of the town's transformation. Eli paused, taking in the scene. He realized that his courage had not only helped individual people but had also reshaped the spirit of the town itself. Willow Creek had begun to understand that action mattered, that kindness mattered, and that courage, even from a single person, could inspire a community. His heart swelled with quiet satisfaction. Not pride, but a deep sense of purpose fulfilled. The town's leaders began to take notice as well. The mayor invited Eli to advise on community projects, not to control them, but to share his perspective on fairness, responsibility, and courage. Townspeople, who had once avoided responsibility, now sought his guidance on small acts of community service.
Slowly but surely, Willow Creek was learning to face its own challenges, inspired by the example of one man who refused to remain silent.
Eli understood that the journey would never truly end.
There would always be new challenges, new people in need, and new opportunities for courage.
But he also knew that the town had changed in ways that could not be undone. The habits of fear and indifference had been disrupted. A new culture of awareness, compassion, and action had begun to take root. Willow Creek, once quiet and hesitant, was now awake, and it had learned that standing up, even when others looked away, was not only possible, but necessary. One morning, as he walked past the town square, Eli noticed something remarkable.
People who had once whispered behind his back now greeted him warmly. Children waved enthusiastically.
Neighbors helped each other without being asked.
The town had learned, slowly and unevenly, that courage could spread, that kindness could inspire, and that even one person could make a difference.
Eli smiled quietly to himself, knowing that he had helped ignite that change. As night fell over Willow Creek, Eli sat by his window, looking at the stars. The town slept peacefully, but the impact of his actions was visible in every street, every home, and every heart willing to act. He reflected on the long journey, the fear, the resistance, the small victories, and the growing courage of the community. Each step had mattered. Each moment had contributed to a transformation that would continue long after he was gone.
And in that quiet night, Eli made a silent promise to himself. He would continue to step forward, to act, and to inspire others not for recognition but because it was the right thing to do.
Willow Creek had learned an important lesson. Courage was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, consistent, and persistent. It was about noticing the needs of others, standing up for what was right, and refusing to look away. The story of Eli Thompson became a part of Willow Creek's history. The town that once avoided its problems had begun to face them with courage and compassion.
people who had once whispered about fear now whispered about hope. And the quiet man who had refused to turn away had shown them all that one person's courage could awaken an entire community. Eli stepped forward, as he always had, knowing that courage was not a single act, but a way of life. And stepping forward, he had reminded everyone in Willow Creek that change was possible, kindness was powerful, and courage, no matter how quiet, could inspire a whole town to look at the world differently.